The Secretary of State, Mike Pompeo, has just left Saudi Arabia, where he held high-stakes meetings with the Crown Prince and King. While President Trump's decision to withdraw U.S. troops from Syria has dominated Pompeo's trip, he is also focused on Yemen's devastating civil war and the murder of journalist Jamal Khashoggi.
The Trump administration has faced global condemnation for failing to acknowledge the Crown Prince's alleged role in Khashoggi's murder, despite the findings of our intelligence agencies. Pompeo spoke with Face the Nation moderator Margaret Brennan about holding Saudi Arabia accountable.
America's position, both privately and publicly, is the same. This was an outrageous act, an unacceptable murder. Those who were responsible will be held accountable by the United States of America. We're determined to do that. We're determined to get at the facts just as quickly and as comprehensively as we can. We've had a policy that's been remarkably consistent with respect to this. We, like the rest of the world, value human rights all across the globe, and the murder of Jamal Khashoggi was outrageous, and we'll hold those responsible accountable.
So for more on this, we want to bring in CBS News State Department reporter Christina Ruffini. She is joining us now from Washington. Christina, so I think probably the #1 question on everyone's mind is, did Pompeo press the Crown Prince on what exactly happened to Khashoggi? Did he press the king? Did he really sort of ask the tough questions that all of us in the media are asking?
Good morning, guys. Well, you know, we only really know what they tell us, right? So these meetings are not open to the public. The way it works is those pictures you see, you know, the press goes in at the top. We're allowed to spray it with a camera, get some photos, and then we get kicked out. So the readouts, we'd rely on the Saudis or the principals in the meeting or the State Department to tell us what happened. Now, all these meetings in total lasted about 80 minutes. Pompeo did gaggle with reporters after, and he said he was very clear that every single person who has responsibility for the murder needs to be held accountable, and that both the king and the Crown Prince acknowledged that. He said the Saudis reiterated their, quote, commitment to achieve the objective and the expectations set for them. Now, what Pompeo didn't address, at least with reporters, was the fact that one of the people American intelligence officials believe is responsible for that murder is, of course, the Crown Prince, who was in the room and one of the people agreeing that the perpetrators need to be brought to justice.
All right, so, you know, this other issue, Christina, is what's happening in Yemen, this catastrophe, this humanitarian crisis that was essentially all fingers point to the Saudis as being primarily responsible for this ongoing humanitarian crisis. What did the Secretary press them on with regards to that?
Well, Yemen has been pushed to the back burner a little bit on this trip because the big focus has been on Iran. Pompeo said the Saudis did agree that they need to help de-escalate the civil war there. But, you know, like I said, Iran and the ceasefire, that's all. There's a ceasefire that was organized at the port of Hodeidah in December, and that has largely been holding. But it's not enough to stop what has arguably become one of the most pressing humanitarian crises in the world. 20 million Yemenis, or about a third of the population, are food insecure, which means basically an entire generation is starving to death. And that phrase, food insecure, means they don't know where their next meal is coming from. The Saudi-led coalition has, especially at the start of the conflict, blocked port access and roads, and that's preventing basic supplies like food and water from getting to the people who need them. And they've ended up, in trying to starve out the rebel forces, they've ended up starving out the population as well. Now, Pompeo said this did come up with the Saudis. They're going to agree to more dialogue. But much more needs to be done in order to return this country to a functioning nation. But again, this hasn't really been the focus of the trip. It was brought up, it was addressed, but it seems to have taken a back seat to issues like the Syrian withdrawal and containing Iran in other places in the region.
We should talk a bit about that, because the primary reason for this trip is for the Secretary to sort of clarify what the President had said, what almost sounded like the President flip-flopping, saying initially we're going to pull all the troops out, and then we had Bolton saying, well, that's not really happening, but then it turns out it sort of is happening based on some of the reporting. So what do we know about what Mike Pompeo said to the Saudis about the U.S. withdrawal from Syria?
Well, he said he brought it up, and, you know, where there's a dialogue and we're all talking about. But the bigger issue is this thing that Trump tweeted this morning, where he said, you know, there's going to be a lot of punishment. There's going to be economic punishment for the Turks if they go after the Kurds in Syria. And that's a problem, because Secretary Pompeo was asked about it, and he said, you know, I've talked to my Kurdish partners and it's all being worked out, and we're talking about these safe zones, but didn't offer a lot of specifics. And when he was asked what specifically those financial consequences could be, he said, well, you know, we're gonna have to talk about that and work that out. This is an issue for Turkey because it's really vulnerable to U.S. sanctions, especially economic sanctions. The Turkish lira is it's very unstable at the moment, and they borrow a lot of money in U.S. dollars. So the more they borrow in U.S. dollars, any policy by the U.S. that could make their currency take a hit on the international markets makes it harder and harder for them to pay back those debts. So this is why this is such a big deal for the Turks to have economic sanctions threatened against them. And in Turkey, the Turkish foreign minister he responded by saying partners shouldn't conduct foreign policy over Twitter. You know, that's an admirable sentiment, but it's not really likely to happen in this administration. Vlad and Ray.
That is an understatement, Christina.
Yeah, right.
Thank you so much, Christina, as always, for your reporting. We appreciate it.
Thanks for having me, guys.